This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, coming at you from where there's a blizzard going on right now, Ottawa, Canada. And at the other end of Canada, in Vancouver, we have a man that has done a docu-series about the paranormal called We Want to Believe, and he's also authored numerous books, including I Want to Believe, One Man's Journey into the Paranormal, I Want to Believe, a Paranormal Investigator's Archive, and Dying Light, an investigation into near death experiences, which we have talked about a little bit on this channel. So, Jason Hewlett, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Good, my friend. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. How's the weather at that end of the country?
It's funny. Like we've had our blizzard. Now it's kind of warm, but in like 2 days, it's apparently going to drop to like -20 again and probably get a bunch more snow. So we just had a bit of a reprieve here.
Oh, well, at least you got a bit of a break. As far as your paranormal documentary series called We Want to Believe, could you tell us a bit about that to start off? Because I think a lot of it's on YouTube, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's currently sitting on the Paranormal Network, um, which is now sort of not putting out new content, but the show is still available on there. And it started by accident, actually. My colleague and I, Peter Wren, we co-founded the Canadian Paranormal Society. We wanted to do a podcast on the paranormal because we figured that was easy. I've got a broadcasting background. And so we started doing that. And we did a promo video on Facebook just about us recording the first podcast, actually on location. That's what we were doing, is we were always going to do investigations, record all the audio, and then put it into podcast format. But the Facebook Live video I put up was seen by a friend of mine named John Fallon, who runs the movie website Arrow in the Head, which is part of the Joe Blow movie network. And they were creating a channel of original content. And he's like, why don't you just turn this into like a web series instead? So I talked to Peter about it. Peter was on board, and we quickly put together a crew of enthusiastic people. And it just went from there. We went back to that same location where we recorded the podcast and did it again, but shot it with video, edited it, and the first episode went live in May 2020. And we did, I think, in total one a month for more than 2 years, so almost like 30 episodes of the series. And it's won best documentary web series twice in a row at Midwest Weird Fest.
Midwest Weird Fest. Wow. So are the investigations mostly around Vancouver, or do you travel all over the place filming these?
All over, like mostly in the interior of British Columbia. We did episodes kind of up at Barkerville, which is a former gold rush town, at O'Keefe Ranch in Vernon, Catani House, numerous like different like Bailey House and Merritt. So all over the place. Then we did a Bigfoot hunt, which was kind of throughout the interior as well, at different locations where there's alleged Bigfoot activity. So we've actually stayed a lot out of the lower mainland and kind of focused more in the interior, which has kind of got a pretty good old haunted history to it. There's lots in Vancouver as well. A lot of the show was done through COVID, so you couldn't get into a lot of locations that were interior. So we kind of had to recalibrate what we were doing and go to places that would let us shoot there or come into their homes, etc.
I've driven through a town in northern Ontario that has a big Bigfoot statue, but I'm not really familiar with anything about Bigfoot in Canada. What have you discovered through your research and investigations about such a species of animal or whatever it is in Canada?
It's, at least here in British Columbia, it's very similar to the stories you kind of hear in the Pacific Northwest. It's a large, hairy, ape-like creature, sort of darker fur color. The activity is very similar as it is anywhere else in the world. Like, they're very elusive. They kind of just sort of pop up when you least expect it. People have heard, the wood knocks associated with it, the calls. Here where I am in British Columbia, that's got a strong connection to Indigenous folklore. That's very much believed to be a forest spirit, kind of a protector of the forest, guardian, so to speak. And its sort of presence is quite often foretold with like feelings of, like you're fine one minute and then the next minute there's like this intense foreboding fear feeling that comes out of nowhere. And then there's a sighting or you're just basically scared off. There's an area in BC called Harrison Hot Springs where there's like a lot of activity kind of in the Harrison area. around Hope, and then up sort of through the Shuswap in the interior, which where we filmed our episodes, sort of the Bonaparte Plateau, Paul Lake, Red Lake Road, where people had sightings or heard wood knocks. So pretty standard Bigfoot stuff that you would find kind of anywhere in the world, only with a slightly more Native American take on it, so to speak, for lack of a better word.
Did you capture any compelling evidence when you were doing the documentary?
Yeah, we recorded wood knocks. We went to this lake up in the Bonaparte Plateau. I think it was called Sunqua Lake, where a guy named Mike, he didn't kind of want his full name on there, and we kind of had to shoot around not to show his face, but he'd been going up there for 20 years. And every time he'd kind of go up and he'd be fishing out on the lake, like he'd hunt and fish in the area. And he got to one end of the lake, he started hearing knocks, and always be these 3 knocks, like this, clonk, 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 like that. And it would always just kind of freak him out. And one time when he was on the boat, he heard kind of a rustling, a lot of noise in the woods, and something had scared, like a 10-point buck out of the woods, and the buck ran right into the lake. So we always thought that was kind of interesting. And we heard his story, and he agreed to take us up there so we could film part of our documentary on that. And so we went out, myself, this Mike guy, and Marcus, who's one of our camera guys, in this boat. And my colleague Sean was sort of stayed on shore because there wasn't enough room in the boat. And actually the boat had this kind of, it was slowly taking on water too, so it was leaking. And we went to that end of the lake, and we didn't hear anything. The knocks didn't come. Of course they didn't. So we kind of tried, we actually went ashore, and this was the first time Mike had gone ashore in that area. We were doing our own knocks to try to get a response. Nothing happened. We got back in the boat and started going back. And as we get close enough, Sean starts yelling, like, "Did you hear knocks? Did you hear the knocks?" And I'm like, no, that was me over there. And he's like, "No, man, you were making the knocks, and something was answering over on this side of the lake." And he actually recorded the audio with his cell phone camera. So I thought that was kind of neat that once we started doing knocks, something on the other side of the lake started knocking back, almost like it knew we were there and was kind of like, "No, you don't," and moved around to stay away from us. But it responded to the knocks that we were making. And we got that actually on camera and on audio, which was kind of neat.
We've heard some people recently, including a guy we were interviewing last night, say they believe there's some connection to UFOs and Bigfoot. And we've heard this about Skinwalker Ranch and stuff, that there's some Bigfoot sightings out there allegedly. Do you think there's a connection, or do you think this is more of some type of mammal we just haven't discovered yet that's lurking around secluded places around the world?
It's funny, kind of like if you were to ask me that question about 4 years ago, I'd have said, no, it's a flesh and blood creature. If it exists, right? Always got to put that caveat in there. But sort of the more research I've done, especially when we were doing the Bigfoot episodes, and when I was sort of talking with people, like with First Nations here, and about their beliefs in it, I'm beginning to think it's something a little more paranormal, actually less flesh and blood. And there's been a lot of connections, as you mentioned, with it being associated with UFO activity, or UFOs being seen and then Bigfoot being seen. And people have even had abduction experiences when they've kind of looked over and then mentioned seeing something that looked like a Bigfoot creature on the craft. I never like explaining an unknown with another unknown, but I'm leaning toward it definitely being more of a supernatural / paranormal being. That's just a way to explain, it's how elusive it is, why people have had tracks in the snow going across the yard, and then the tracks just kind of stopped, like it disappeared into thin air, what people have seen at Skinwalker Ranch. And then there's even, I know people like investigators who look into Bigfoot, and they've had something show up on like a FLIR camera, like an infrared camera, and they can see the creature, and then it just sort of dematerializes in front of them in the camera. So I'm beginning to think that it's definitely more of a supernatural paranormal entity. And I think all this stuff like UFOs and ghost sightings and monsters and Mothman, I think it's all like one interrelated phenomenon that's been going on the planet. And it's been going on as long as there's been people here. And we just haven't quite figured it out yet for various reasons.
Yeah, it seems as though a lot of people think UFOs are kind of the most credible, and the other stuff isn't really worth researching. And there's even been some New York Post, I believe, trying to create some propaganda related to the UFO research programs in the US right now due to some of the investigations they've done in other phenomena lately. So it's interesting that you think it's all connected potentially. Someone on here is asking what you think of the famous Patterson footage from 1967 of an alleged Bigfoot in Northern California. That might still be the most known Bigfoot footage that anyone has seen.
The Patterson Gimlin film, yeah. We actually did an episode. We did a web series for a while called Hunting the Haunted, where Peter and I would take individual sort of cases like Amityville or Enfield, and set the Patterson Gimlin film and try to deconstruct it. There's been so much talks about it being a hoax or being real. Yeah, I'm always on the fence, because like one of them came out and said, I think it might have been Gimlin, and said that it was faked, and talked about how he had someone dress up and walk around, etc. But then, you hear other people like I think it was Patterson who said, no, it wasn't, kind of thing. And there's so much back and forth that it creates this doubt. I hate to give like an on the fence answer, but I'm not sure. Like sometimes I lean more towards, yeah, no, it just seems too good to be true. But at the same time, why couldn't it be true? And people say like, it's female, it's got breasts, the way that it moves, it doesn't move like a person. It moves just like something else entirely. And then the way everything moves with the weight. So I know Peter, he doesn't think it's real, but I swing back and forth, which I apologize. It's kind of one of those on the fence answers, but man, if it is real, that is some great piece of footage. And why haven't we got anything quite as good since? Maybe is, especially with the technology we have now, you think we could capture something as good, if not better. So I think that's why sometimes I lean towards it not being real.
Yeah, that Bigfoot is one I haven't had as much interest in for that reason. There hasn't been really that much convincing evidence as far as video footage that has come out since then. And unlike UFOs, I don't know if Bigfoot could actually present a threat to the world, but it's interesting talking to people like you that have researched it. There's a fan on here that says people go missing in national parks all the time. Could that be connected to Bigfoot in any way? Of course, there's lots of things in national parks that can be dangerous, but what do you think about that?
It could be. There's Small Town Monsters did a documentary called American Werewolves, and they that was not so much werewolves, but it's about like dogmen, which is another phenomenon that's creeped up lately. And they touch on Sasquatch in that, and that there's some parks in the States where there have been Bigfoot sightings and aggressive dogmen sightings, and people have disappeared in those areas. So yeah, I think that could be it, right? Like you run afoul of maybe of a Squatch in the woods at the wrong time, and it doesn't want you there. It could make you disappear real easy. Like you say, there's lots of other possibilities too. There's a documentary that just came out, I think last week or late last year, called Missing 411. It's part of the Missing 411 series, and it brings in the UFO connection. And they put some interesting evidence forward that says it could be a results of UFO sightings, like UFO abductions, why people are going missing in these parks as well, which that could be true too. If all of this is intertwined, so to speak, and if it touches more on, say, the supernatural and interdimensional beings, there's lots of out there possibilities that could relate to that for sure.
Have you done any documentaries on Ogopogo at all, since it's out in BC and one of the most famous sea monsters in the world? Or is that something that you're not interested in covering?
No, I'm actually fascinated with Ogopogo, and I'm currently working on a book about Ogopogo, like just started in the last 2 weeks, actually. It's funny you mentioned that. And I'm hoping that we can do a documentary component to that as well. Like Ogopogo, it presents its own challenges, being that it's on a lake and in the water. And then that requires, getting the boats and everything together. And like I said, with the last 2 years, people were hesitant to do a lot of stuff that way. But I love the Ogopogo story. It too, as with Bigfoot, relates heavily into sort of indigenous First Nations folklore here in British Columbia. So yeah, actually, that's something I'm super fascinated with and currently working on right now, actually. And I'm hoping come later this year, we'll actually be able to get in the water and do something with that, like actually get in the water and do some filming that could be related to that.
Yeah, I've always been interested in that topic. I've noticed there has been some newer videos come out about it in recent years. Is there any that you've seen that stand out to you that could be credible that have been released since cell phone cameras have come out?
You know, there is some actual still photographs that came out over the summer that people took, and it's they've got something. You might have seen them. I think it made like news worldwide. It looks like some head in the water that resembles what people believe Ogopogo could look like. And they're pretty compelling. Some people have said it was a bird underwater, which maybe it was, but it didn't look to me like a bird underwater. There's been lots of video taken of what they think are like, the humps moving through the water, but to me those just look like waves. I remember way back in the day when the original Unsolved Mysteries was on, they put up what people had claimed was compelling evidence, shot with like an early cell phone camera of Ogopogo, and it was actually a beaver, like, the Canadian beaver. So I haven't seen a lot of video evidence presented on Ogopogo that really makes sense to me, but that one picture that came out in August sure looked compelling to me, like it could be something.
Yeah, I think I found it here. I guess Global News did a story on it, and
They
I'll put it
did.
up and see if it's the same one, or I'll put it up in a bit. But what is it about the Ogopogo that you think it might be? Because we've heard some people say it might be a plesiosaur or an overgrown sturgeon. Some people even say it's moose, because moose, I think, swim sometimes. What do you think it might be, if it's a sea monster or something that's a more natural explanation?
I would love it. Same with like Loch Ness monster, and it's interesting how a lot of these lakes where lake monster sightings occur, they're very similar. Like they're kind of long, narrow lakes, very deep, you know, murky water, etc. And Lake Okanagan and Loch Ness are almost on the same geographical line. Um, so I would love for like it to be like a plesiosaur kind of monster. I'm doubtful though. I think that'd be great if there's a way that that could exist, and somehow survive through some elaborate, underwater tunnel system that maybe leads out to the oceans. I'm thinking people are probably seeing something like an oversized sturgeon or even like an eel. Um, I'm sure some of the sightings could be related to like a moose swimming across the lake or some other animal. But I think in that sense, at least for me right now, that we're leaning towards something more natural than supernatural, because just lakes are like a limited body of water. There's only so many places something like that could hide or reside. And, we never see bodies wash up. Like you see fish carcasses come up from time to time. And the sightings are so infrequent that I kind of, as much as it pains me to say it, I don't lean towards it being anything other than something natural being mistaken for something that's not.
And I believe this is the photo you're talking about.
Yes.
That I've never seen this, so this is pretty cool. It looks like almost a head.
Yes. Yeah, it does,
Sitting.
doesn't it? Like you can see what could be the horns, and then the snout, which Ogopogo is supposed to have like sort of that kind of a snout. And it was apparently quite far out in the water, which is the other thing, right? And it kind of looks like you can kind of see a neck there, something disappearing down into the depths. So I think that's an interesting, one of the best sort of pictures I've seen that could be Ogopogo in a very long time.
Yeah, because there were some of the older ones that showed humps and stuff from like the 60s and 70s, which they could have been fake because they were taken from far away, but that's pretty close up. That's very interesting. I think Vancouver Island, doesn't it have a monster as well?
Yeah, there's all through that sort of area. What is it? I can't remember what it's, Cadborosaurus. So caddy, and it's sort of more like it exists sort of in, around Vancouver Island, like in the ocean there. But people have been seeing something in those waters for hundreds of years. And it's very much sort of the sea serpent sort of thing, you traditionally hear about, like the long body, the head. People have seen the humps. Sometimes they have come out and said it's like the plesiosaur, like so many of those are, but that's existed. That's been a part of sort of folklore and local legend here in British Columbia for hundreds of years.
Have you seen the Florida sea monster YouTube video that some people say it could have been seals or something, but it's fairly convincing of something with a tail that's coming in and out of the water. It came out about 10 years ago, but people say it could have been a seal that had its tail chopped by a propeller or something.
I haven't seen that. Like, I've heard of it. Like, that sounds familiar, especially when you mentioned the seal angle.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've actually seen that one, at least not recently enough to comment.
Yeah, it's pretty much the best sea monster footage I've seen, but it's so convincing that you would think that if it was real, more of a big deal would have been done about it. And I don't think it specifies what lake it's in or anything like that, but it's quite impressive footage. But as far as your ghost research, what's some of the best evidence that you found so far while doing your episodes?
Well, we found a few. Like when we were up at Barkerville, um, we were able to leave sort of our cameras set up overnight in some of the buildings, and the buildings were left locked, um, and so there's no way anyone could kind of get in and mess with them. And if you could, the one camera we had set up in this post office, you had to come through the door, and the camera would catch you walking through the door. So, and when we went back the next morning, for one, on the camera that was in the post office showing at the door, you have a number of the camera kind of going off, but nothing being seen, no door opening. And then in one shot, you can make out the silhouette of this figure sort of standing in front of the camera, and it's transparent, which that was pretty cool. And then in one of the hotels, it was the Barkerville Hotel, there we had cameras at either end of the hallway shooting, and there was the stairwell was in the middle. So if anyone come up, the motion cameras would have captured someone coming up. And overnight, one of the cameras had moved and shifted, not a lot, like a few inches, but you could tell in the series of pictures that it had shifted. And then in another shot, there's a doorway, and there's nothing in the doorway. And in the next shot, you can see kind of an arm out of the doorway, and it looks like a coat, and you could see sort of a sleeve with some white. So that was, and then in the next series of shots after that, there was nothing. So that's some pretty compelling evidence, and that's on one of our last episodes that went up actually on for We Want to Believe. And another one which we filmed in at Bailey House here in Merritt, we were using a laser grid, and we'd had the laser grid set up, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It fires this laser pattern up against a wall, and the belief is that if something breaks that laser, even if you can't see it, it will then cast a shadow. And we've had this happen a few times on investigations, but we had our camera set up. We went in, turned the lights out, had the laser grid on, and you could see what looked like part of a body, shadow of like part of a body on the wall. And so I turned the light on, and you can see that there's nothing there to cause that. No one's standing there. We kind of do some tests, playing with the camera, turn the light off and on several times, and that shadow was there. And then over a series of minutes, it just slowly kind of moved away on us. So that's kind of, for video evidence, that was pretty compelling during our time doing the series. At O'Keefe Ranch, we picked up a scream actually on camera, and then it sounded like on camera like a fox or a cat or something like that, which was weird because we were up in the attic of the main manor house. But when we went back and reviewed the evidence, which we also did on camera, it actually was a woman screaming, "Help me," in this part of the building, that was pretty compelling as well. And then recently, we didn't have it on the show, but we were doing a residential haunting, Peter and myself, and it was a townhouse, 3-floor townhouse. We were on the top floor, and we kept hearing noises down on the stairwell while we were doing an EVP session. And so we were filming it, and it's actually up on another channel of ours, the I Want to Believe channel, where Peter's asking, like, well, where are you? On the stairs. When he says stairs, this old man voice that you can hear, and we're not using a spirit box or anything. You can hear the old man voice go, "Bingo," which I thought that was pretty compelling as well. So there's just a few examples over the last few years that we've caught so far.
Now, the spirit boxes are those electronic things that supposedly it makes it easier for spirits to broadcast their voice through. How did those work?
It functions like an AM/FM receiver. So you run through various channels, and it does it quickly, and it kind of makes like a tut sound. And the belief is that when the voice comes through, that stops, and you'll hear a voice say, something. Usually it's a word or 2 words, a very short phrase. Yes, because it's running through AM FM frequencies, a lot of the time it is radio chatter, and that's where some skepticism comes up about it. And we're a bit skeptical that way too. So the only thing we kind of take is any kind of compelling, evidence from a spirit box is if we're asking intelligent questions where you can get an intelligent response. Like, for example, we were doing an investigation at a chiropractic clinic in Vernon, and we were filming that as well. And we were using the spirit box only at the end after we'd done our usual or the rest of our investigation. And we sort of would ask, like, what city are we in? And you get a voice back that would answer with Vernon. Or another example at Bailey House, we knew that one of the past owners was a gentleman named Tom. And so when we were kind of asking for it to identify itself, we got the name Tom back. So we can take that sort of with a little more trust, or if you get sort of the same voice responding to a number of questions and it's responding intelligently as well. But people are skeptical about it. We try not to use it too much or rely on it as being the only source of evidence. We like to back it up with other things as well.
This person mentioned something that I've heard, messing around with spirits, they can attach to you. Have you ever experienced anything like this, or do you think that's not possible?
No, I've been doing this 20 years. I've never really had anything attached to me. I've actually been very fortunate and had no misfortune. I know there's people who definitely believe that that's possible. I think a lot of that can come down to your spiritual or religious beliefs and how that ties into belief in the paranormal. That being said, whenever we go somewhere and start an investigation and finish it, we kind of have when we start off, we say we're just here to communicate with you. We're not here to cause any trouble or you any harm, and nor do we want harm to come to us. And then at the end, we actually say, okay, we're finishing now. We thank whatever's there for its time, and we don't give it permission to follow us home. So maybe that plays into it a bit as well.
Somebody has a question here that I'm not sure you could answer. Can people that pass away see us?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, because they interact. There's like these intelligent hauntings where something's definitely interacting with the homeowner, the business owner, with us as investigators. So I believe they can see us, they can hear us. It's no different than, say, you and I being in the same room or even talking this way. It's just they're on a slightly different plane of existence than we are. Hence they we can't see them, but they can see us.
Do you think there's different kinds of haunting? Like, I've heard there's some, like you mentioned, that interact, and there's some that's like a scene in history that just continuously plays out, and then there's the ones you don't want that are like supposedly demonic and will actually try and scare you and make your life miserable.
Yeah, well, there's quite a few kinds. I mean, there is the intelligent haunting, like the one I mentioned, where it can interact with you. It can open and close doors, run around, etc. There's residual hauntings, and that's the kind where it's basically like the same thing repeating over and over again, and only at like certain times of day or night or certain weather circumstances. It's like something's happened that's been imprinted on the area, like a tape. It's sometimes called stone tape theory. So it's just the same thing repeating over and over again, and it won't interact with you at all. It doesn't even recognize that you're there. We had this actually at a residential school in Vancouver, and at sort of 12:30 at night, when there's a full moon, like you could hear something running up and down the fire escape outside. And if you were there at that time, you could pick it up and hear it plain as day. So those are kind of the two main ones. There's poltergeist activity, which, that's like what a lot of people hear about, where like doors open and close and slam, things being thrown around. And there's a belief that that's more related to sort of the energy that someone creates, quite often someone going through puberty, quite often like a female. And it sort of creates this energetic force around you that causes this to happen. And these people are in turmoil. So that's manifesting itself that way. And then, yeah, there's the demonic kind. We like to call them negative hauntings, basically. So it's something there that's pissed off, for lack of a better word, and it's trying to make someone's life miserable and scare them, and for whatever reason. And a lot of people who are religious will call it demonic in that sense. So Those are kind of the main ones. And there's also sometimes like people get into portals, which is that's like that just means you're somewhere where there's a portal between our world and the spirit world, and things come back and forth. Some people believe those are mirrors can cause that, or you're near a body of water. So those are kind of the big ones.
Do you believe in the people that say that they can exorcise a house and like exorcists or spiritual deliverance ministers that can clear a house of a haunting?
Well, I like, yeah, I mean, there's definitely like, in the Catholic Church, people who are ordained exorcists that do operate that way. Peter is an investigator for an ordained exorcist out of Washington State. So sure. I don't think that's something that just anybody can do, nor should anybody do it. I'm skeptical of someone that just says that they can. I think people who do that, like a legitimate demonologist, someone that's been trained by someone who knows what they're doing. And there's actually like the Vatican has schools for exorcists. I think you've got to be a priest or within the Catholic community to do that. So yeah, I don't doubt that there's people who can. I just don't think everyone that claims that they can do it or should do it.
What got you interested in this type of thing? Did you have a personal experience that made you want to research it further, or you were just naturally interested in the subjects?
I had a couple of things happen, like a lot of people who do this. When I was young, I had some things happen I couldn't explain. I always kind of had a weird anxiety about the dark, and at night, I always felt like something was in my room watching me. When I was about 5 or 6, I was in my mom's car, and we'd gone to pick up a friend of mine who was going to sleep over. And so we were parked on the street, and she went up to get my friend, and for whatever reason, I stayed in the car. And I was sort of looking out the back. It was an old hatchback. And the street was bare and there's no one around. And suddenly this face appeared on the other side of the hatchback, and it was looking at me. And it was like this weird mongoloid, like, Jason Voorhees-esque face. And it freaked me out. And I remember dropping to the bottom, like the seat, so I couldn't see out and hopefully it couldn't see in. I never heard anyone approach or anyone leave. And then finally I did hear footsteps, and it was my mom and my friend. And I was like, did you see anyone around the car? And they're like, no, there hasn't been anybody around. I'm like, were you guys around here messing with me? And they're like, no, we just got here. And sure enough, I had just heard them get there. So I have no idea what that was, but it left a mark. I mean, that was a good 45 years ago, and I can still remember it. I can still see that face. And that kind of really pushed my interest into overdrive. And then when I was in my teens, we were staying up in the Shuswap, where my family had a cabin up there. So we spent a lot of time up there, and I quite often bring a friend of mine with me. And we were free range children, so we could kind of go in and out of the woods as long as we were back kind of for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and bedtime. They didn't care what we were doing. And we always took the same route in and out of the woods to the cabin. And one night, me and my buddy Mike were out there, and he's always been interested in this stuff too. We kind of took the route down and past this stand of trees, pine trees that are always there. And we went and had our dinner and cleaned up, and we figured we'd do one more rip in the woods. So we took the same path out. As we were going past that stand of pine trees, and only an hour had gone by, but now underneath the one big tree, all the pine needles were cleared away. There was a lean-to built. It wasn't tall, like it was something like, that maybe a little kid would stay in. And around, but it was made out of like sticks and, turf and dirt. And it was dug out, and inside the lean-to, there was this bone, and just outside the lean-to was this little fire pit. And it was dusk. We were looking at that, and that's weird. There's no way someone could have done that in an hour to build it so well. It was getting dark. We're getting a little bit sketched out. So, all right, well, let's get out of here. Let's go back to the cabin. But we couldn't stop talking about that. So first thing the next morning, we got up, we got dressed, we went back up to those stand of trees. None of that was there. And the ground was completely covered with pine needles once again, like it hadn't even been disturbed at all. And so I can't explain what that was. Neither can my friend Mike. But that just, from that point on, it wasn't just interested in ghosts and stuff like that. I was interested in Bigfoot and monsters and watching every show that came on television about it, like In Search of Unsolved Mysteries, sightings. And finally, kind of when I was in my, in 2003, I actually had the opportunity to go on my first real paranormal investigation, and it kind of just been going since then.
Did you ever see the In Search of Ogopogo? I remember that one where there was a guy that had like this yellow boat. And he said for some reason it seemed like Ogopogo was attracted to that boat.
I do remember that one. Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool that something like In Search of would do a show on that.
Yeah.
because they always touch on the Loch Ness, you know, but I mean, and I remember the Loch Ness one, like they showed the guy, it was, or maybe that was Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, but the guy had a car that would convert into a boat when he drove it into the water in case he saw a sighting at the drop of a hat. But yeah, I thought that was great, that In Search of Did Ogopogo. That just shows how far back that goes.
Yeah, and the spooky music that made it more creepy from back in that time. But you're also interested in, and you've written a book related to near-death experiences. What got you interested in that? And could you tell us a little bit about your research in that field?
Yeah. The reason we did a book on near-death experiences is for our second book, The Investigator's Archive. We interviewed a paranormal investigator named Angela Artuso out of New York. And the whole point of that book was to take different investigators, tell their stories, like what got them interested in it, you know, what they do on their investigations, etc. So when she was telling her personal story, she had had a near-death experience. And this near-death experience was so different than the ones we'd always heard about. And it was so compelling, a part of her story, that we didn't want it to get lost in the shuffle of this book. So as soon as we finished interviewing her, I phoned Peter up, because we were doing it over Zoom at the time. And I'm like, we got to do a book on this. And he's like, yeah, for sure. So I talked to the publisher, Beyond the Fray Publishing, and they loved the idea. So as soon as we finished the second book and got it out, we re-interviewed Angela and then started looking for other experiencers. Plus, not wanting to just do a book on experiences, you know, talk to like a neuroscientist, you know, talk to like a grief counselor, so we could explore not only these people's experiences, but what could actually be happening to them. Is it something, are they really dying and going somewhere else? Or is it like the brain sort of firing as the body dies, etc., which is the scientific explanation quite often. And then through that, we also touch a bit on, past lives with reincarnation, etc. So we tried to run a whole gamut, and we did interviews like all through the first half of last year. And then the book came out in June, and it was quite an experience to write, because a lot of these stories, they're very, at one time they're sad because you're talking about death. And then on the other hand, everyone that has these experiences comes out of them for the better. And that their life has changed in a positive way. So yeah, it was a real eye-opening experience, because I didn't know a lot about it before that, other than like, watching the Surviving Death series on Netflix and just, hearing people's stories.
So what's your theory on what happens when you pass? Do you think there's one exact path that you take, or from your research into ghosts and near-death experiences, do you think there's multiple things that could happen?
Well, the one thing that was interesting is all these experiences, like there were some similarities quite often, like the tunnel of light and something being on the other side, kind of waiting, for you, like a relative who had previously passed, or someone that you think, but you've never seen them before. But all of them actually are in some way also very subjective and based on the experiencer's personal experience. So their life experience plays into it, their religious upbringing, whether they're spiritual or not, or atheist, all of that plays a part in these experiences. But the big thing is that something's happening to these people. I think they are going somewhere, and they just don't cross over fully. And I think it ties in a way, it feels like it ties into sort of multiverse theory for me, which I think is a way of kind of explaining a lot of this stuff that we're experiencing, be it ghosts, ghost hauntings, UFOs, etc. I think it just has something to do with all the different planes of existence. I mean, in the book, we talked to a gentleman named David Bettenhouse and Carla Bogney Kidd, and they deal a lot with past lives. But they say, like, through meditation, they can kind of almost like go into their past life and experience it and get memories back from that, and then they come back. And then another gentleman, Scott Taylor, who had a near-death experience, only he wasn't the one dying. He was like a witness to it and taken on this journey, which I know sounds weird and crazy, but he sure believes it happened. He too, through meditation, can go to this other plane where everyone goes when they have these experiences before they pass on to wherever it is they pass on to. So I think something's happening, and I think it has to tie into multiverse theory. So I know I don't like to explain an unknown with an unknown, but I'm kind of leaning to that just based on the research I've done and the people I've talked to.
Yeah, there's definitely some good evidence out there for reincarnation. I did find a short clip of this Florida sea monster to show you,
Oh,
so
please
I'll
do.
just put this up for 20 seconds.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So people are saying that is like could possibly be a manatee's tail.
It could. It kind of looks like it, right?
Yeah,
Um, it's so like it's interesting. It's a really good close up shot of that part of it, right? So that's why
yeah.
it'd be neat. Too bad if there was, but maybe that's all that people saw. But I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a longer clip out there, but I didn't want to take up too much of your time. But it is a very interesting one for sure. Through your research on the near-death experiences and ghosts, has it made you kind of more comfortable with the possibility of death that's going to happen to everybody, or is that something that still you like most people have a bit of fear of?
Like it's funny. Like I mean, I'm 50, so I know I've got kind of less time left on this planet than I've had so far. So it's always a part. And I've got like an 11-year-old, and the idea of leaving anytime soon isn't great. More because I don't want to leave him or my wife, etc. And I still feel like I have things to do here, but definitely, yeah, like especially writing that book, like it changed my whole perspective on it. Like I very much, I've sort of feel I've had past lives that I'm starting to get in touch with. I'm not scared of the concept of dying because I figure we'll just do this again, another rodeo. Um, and with all the investigating I've done and research, like there's a compelling argument for life after death. So no, it's not something. I mean, I'm in no hurry to get there, but I'm not scared of the idea either. I kind of look at the concept of our mortality as invigorating, as a way to not waste time on this planet. Like, kind of do the things you love to do, spend time with the people you want to spend time with. Don't stress about all this other BS that's going on in the world that's outside of your realm of control. Focus on living a good life, the kind of life that you want to live, and doing the things that you want with it. And I think then it just makes life more fulfilling. Um, and live each day to as if it is your last. Get the most out of every day that you can. And I find that just kind of brings me comfort.
What does your 11-year-old think about all this stuff? Has he joined you on any of your investigations?
No, he hasn't yet. I know he would sure like to. I think when he's older, it'd be a blast to have him come on. But he thinks it's really cool, and he's always asking me questions about stuff. Like he likes to watch YouTube, and there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that proclaims to be like actual accurate paranormal evidence or activity. So I like to sit with him and kind of point out, nah, I think that's fake, and why. Or he hears stories about something, and do you think this is a true story, Dad, or not? And if it's something I've heard of, I kind of weigh in on that. So yeah, he's fascinated by it. And I know once he's old enough, I probably want him to be like, late teens before I let him come out and do any of this stuff. Partly because I think he'd just be bored. So it's not always the most exciting thing to do, but it's good because my wife is a total Scully. So the fact that he kind of sides with me on this stuff, I think is kind of neat. And it's sort of a little bond that we share.
So for someone that hasn't seen any of your We Want to Believe episodes yet, is there one or two in particular that you would suggest people look up?
Yeah, I think um the one like we did the Bigfoot hunt. It was a 4-part one that came out. And I think it's just called like the hunt for Bigfoot. And so those ones are great, all 4 parts. And we feature Shannon LeGros, who's a paranormal podcaster who does Into the Fray. And she's also appeared on some Small Town Monsters episodes on the Trail of UFOs. Plus Ken Gearhart, who's a very big cryptozoologist out of the States. So they're featured on those ones. Our 2-part Ghosts of Barkerville paranormal investigation, I think, is really good as well. Barkerville's a fascinating place with a great history. And that's where we captured the evidence in the post office. Have some good photographic evidence. And then there's also a 2-parter called which took place at O'Keefe Ranch, which I think that's quite fascinating as well, that people would really enjoy those. So those are kind of my big ones. I think in total that'd be looking at, for eight episodes total if people want to track it down.
Have you done any investigating into UFOs? I know there's a lot of sightings in BC. Is that something you want to eventually cover as well, or you're going to stick with the three topics you're mainly covering now with ghosts, Bigfoot, and near death experiences.
I think we definitely like here at Canadian Paranormal Society, we want to get into the UFO stuff too. It's something we've always wanted to do. Excuse me, but we haven't done yet. I think partly because like there's lots of sightings, but we want to find a good place to go and spend a considerable amount of time there. Because I don't think you could just say, we're going to go up, on Saturday with our cameras and get anything. I don't think that would work. So we have a colleague of ours named Charles Lamoureux out of Vancouver who he knows a couple of good places. And so when he's available, we would like to go with him. And it's probably something we want to do more in the summer than at this time of year. So it's on our docket for 2023 for sure to sort of get more into the UFO stuff as well.
What are the minimum tools someone should bring on a ghost investigation? Because I rented a haunted house 3 years ago, and all I brought was a Ouija board, and the Ouija board didn't even do anything, and nothing happened in this house for 3 days, and it was one of the most famous haunted houses around this area, so it was a little disappointing. Could it just be that you can't always expect activity, or is there some tools that you could use to help detect things that don't cost a lot of money?
Well, I can tell you, like your experience isn't unusual. Quite often, these places that are purported to be paranormal hotspots never deliver. It's so rare. It's more people building something up. So I'm sorry you had that experience. You brought a Ouija board. That's a great way to make contact. I know a lot of people, oh no, they're evil and they open portals to hell and blah blah blah. No, they're just another means of communication. And I've had more misses with them than hits. I think if you're going to investigate, all you really like, your own body's a great sense if something's up. Um, Quite often, you can feel if there's something else in the room with you. It's just a sense that you get. But in terms of equipment, all you really, honestly, all you really need, like you need a pad and a pen, so you can jot down how you're feeling and say at what time of the night and what room you're in, and then a digital recorder, and just leave it on. Ask a question, and then give it a good 30 seconds, even a minute, and just don't say anything. Then ask another question. And when you go home, review that audio evidence. And if you get some, that's a good shot of getting something. Otherwise, I mean, you can have trigger objects. Excuse me. We sometimes use REM pods. So they're like a motion activated little thing you put on the ground with an antenna. And if you go near it, it lights up. You can use that to try to pick up any activity, but something's got to come close enough to it. And it can be triggered, if a big enough truck passes by, that can set them off too. So we stick mostly with our digital recorders and pad and paper.
Interesting. And as a filmmaker, someone that's been to film school, how do you feel about how Hollywood generally portrays the paranormal compared to actual experiences you've had?
Well, because it's movies and television, they sure make it seem a lot more exciting than it is. And the activity is so much more overblown. I mean, when you hear something, there's a risk to what Hollywood does. Like, I get why they do it, because they're in the business of making money. People like to see ghosts. They like to be scared. So you kind of have to create these thrill rides. Like I love the Conjuring movies. I think they're fantastic. Based on what I know, just sort of the Warrens and their cases, I think the movies have taken everything and blown them up. So, but when they put based on a true story in front of something, a lot of people believe that at face value. And I think it kind of scares people about the paranormal more than they need to be. A lot of the time, there might be something that's surprising, but it's very rarely overly scary if you can kind of just stop and think about what you're experiencing. There's quite often like a logical explanation for what's going on. Rarely is it something so spooky or terrible that there's like, a ghost or a demon in your house. But when there is, it's just not that frightening. And being an investigator isn't as exciting as they make it out. I haven't been dragged across a room and thrown against the ceiling. Neither is any of the other people I've worked with. It's usually quite calm. It's very quiet. Sometimes it's not really quite boring because you're just kind of sitting in a room with your recorders out. Sometimes you're using other stuff to, like motion sensors or motion control cameras, but you can go for, several investigations and nothing happens. And then when something does happen, it's something as simple as maybe a shadow. that you're catching on camera, or you pick up that voice whispering that you didn't hear when you were there, but you've heard it when you reviewed your evidence. So, and I think, I don't fault Hollywood for it, but I think it does kind of give what we do. It makes it scarier than it is. I think it freaks people out more than they need to be. And I think it just makes it seem a whole lot more interesting than what we do.
This fan wants to know more about Ouija boards. Have you had any particular experiences with them that stand out to you over the years?
Um, Not during an investigation. The couple times we've used them during an investigation is kind of like your experience. Like we didn't really get much out of it. But I mean, my buddy Mike have used them in the past, and when it's just been him and I know we did everything wrong because we didn't know what we were doing. So we were at the house I kind of grew up in. The folks were gone. We had a bunch of drinks. We broke out the Ouija board and got the recorder going. And we feel we got in contact with something. And, we saw like the candles, like the candle flames would be higher at times in response to kind of questions. And the only thing that was interesting is that, he went home and I stayed at my house, and I had like the worst dreams ever that night of like figures in robes and intruders in the house, etc. That I woke up at like 5:30 in the morning, couldn't go back to sleep, freaked right out. And I kind of called him the next day, and he had very similar experiences in dreams. Did we psych ourselves up because before doing the Ouija board, we watched a bunch of horror movies? I don't know. But that's kind of the only truly weird experiences I've had with them. I know people who they believe they've been contacted by relatives, and the responses they got did jibe with what they knew of their relatives and their experiences. So I can't dismiss them. I think, like I said earlier, they're just another means of communicating. And I think you have to kind of know what you're doing with them, and take everything maybe with a titch of a grain of salt, if that makes sense. And definitely don't drink a bunch of liquor before using it.
Yeah, that never mixes. And I could say anytime I've tried to do it in that way, I haven't had any luck. As far as the Canadian Paranormal Society that you've co-founded, what exactly is that?
It's a government registered society, and we investigate all facets of the paranormal. We're located out of British Columbia. We do specialize primarily in people who are reporting hauntings, be it residential homes, commercial properties, historical sites. We go in, we do our research, we do our interviews, we do our investigations. Whatever evidence we find, we present back to the homeowner or business owner or property owner, and let them do with it as they please. A lot of the times, we're lucky enough that we can go back to these locations several times, so we can actually try to come up with theories and test them in these homes and businesses. Another service that we do offer is we do presentations as fundraisers for various businesses and other not for profits. So we go in and we give our presentation about our experiences as paranormal investigators, talk about the history of the paranormal, present what evidence we have, what we've been able to get up through research in terms of the types of hauntings, etc., and present it to people. And any kind of money we make through the door, we give back to these agencies as a fundraiser for them. And sometimes we do these just on our own to raise a little bit extra cash for us for new equipment, but most of the time we use it as fundraisers for various agencies or societies as well.
There's a fan on here that wants to know what you think about these Men in Black stories.
Well, they've been reported almost as long as there's been UFOs, and quite often the behavior of these Men in Black are a bit weird or sinister as well. John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies and did a lot of research into UFO sightings, Mothman sightings, he came up kind of with this ultraverse theory and ultra terrestrials, and he believes, which kind of is basically just like the multiverse theory, he believes that the Men in Black are all part of the phenomenon as well. And they're kind of meant to throw people and scare people. Because they show up after these sightings and they try to dissuade the person who saw it from revealing any further information. So I think that's fascinating. I mean, it could also be related to the government as well. There's the two camps there, that they're government agents who don't want people to tell the truth about their UFO sightings for whatever various reasons, because maybe they're all just classified spy craft or something. But those are kind of the two bits of it. I've never had a MIB encounter, so I can't really give a firsthand account of it. But I like Keel's kind of explanation as I'm being tied in very much a part of this phenomenon as well.
So, for your books, where can people pick them up if they're interested in learning more about your studies?
The books can be picked up through Beyond the Fray Publishing or on Amazon, and it's available on pretty much any Amazon platform all over the world, as well as the Book Depository as well. And the titles are I Want to Believe, One Man's Journey into the Paranormal, I Want to Believe, An Investigator's Archive, and Dying Light, an investigation into near-death experiences. And that kind of incorporates a lot of the research we have has gone into those books, as well as the We Want to Believe series on YouTube, which you can find just by typing We Want to Believe Paranormal Network, and you should be able to find them.
And for yourself on social media, I believe you have Facebook and Instagram if people want to look you up.
Yep, you can just look up Jason Hewlett on Facebook and on Instagram. On Instagram, it's jhewlett72. You got to be careful because there's another guy out there named Jason Hewlett who's a comedian and public speaker, and we get mistaken for each other a lot, which I think is kind of interesting.
And I see you're a Pulp Fiction fan.
I sure am. I'm a big movie buff. Like I actually have a film background as well, like film school. So yeah, Pulp Fiction, Fight Club, they're great. Even I don't even mind I can't see it, but Last Action Hero is all right.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever even seen Last Action Hero, but I heard it had terrible reviews for some reason, and it was a box office flop.
It was, and I remember watching it. And I mean, it's not Arnold's finest, but I'm a Schwarzenegger completist, so I like to watch it. It's good for a laugh.
How would you compare The Rock to Arnold?
It's interesting because The Rock is Schwarzenegger now. Like, how Schwarzenegger was back in the day. That's The Rock now. I think, yeah, I think The Rock is amazing. I think he's I was never a big wrestling fan. He was one of the few wrestlers that I like, but he sure has done a great job of transitioning from like that sports entertainment into mainstream entertainment. And he's just got this personality that you just enjoy watching him. And Schwarzenegger had that back in the day too, right? Like he brings sort of a sense of humor to it. And even though he's this larger than life figure, like a humanity, which I think was the appeal of both Schwarzenegger and with The Rock right now. So I always try to catch all The Rock's movies now.
Could you see yourself doing a fiction movie about the paranormal that's more realistic than the typical Hollywood ones?
Yeah, it's something, one day I'd love to try to tackle that subject matter. I mean, we're working actually on our own like feature length doc project right now, which we're hoping to shoot sort of, in May, which I think will be great. And then it'd be neat to sort of take these experiences and yeah, write them out as maybe a script or something and just see what could be done with it, just sort of to show a more realistic presentation of paranormal investigation. I don't know how scary it would be in the end. I guess you'd kind of have to take some liberties, but I wouldn't want to blow it up like a lot of these movies and TV shows are.
Yeah, the one thing I find about horror movies these days is they use too much computer animation, and that just takes me out of like the suspension of disbelief because I know this is just computer animation.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is the original Thing back in like 1982, and then they did the one in 2011 where it was all CGI and it just didn't work. It wasn't as scary or gross out. I think that's why I like the Conjuring movies. Like anything that James Wan does, like when he does his ghosts, it's actually just actors on set. And I think that's what makes them so much more effective than like, than what they do. Like you say, in a lot of them, like the less you sort of show or the more believable you make it look, the scarier it is. And when you kind of go in and CGI it up, it just ruins it. Like I think of the original The Haunting from like, I think it was like the 1960s, black and white. You didn't see anything. The biggest effect was something pushing on a door. But when they did the remake in 1999, it was CGI ghosts everywhere, and it was more laughable than anything else.
Well, it's been nice getting all this information from you. You seem more neutral than a lot of people in your field, which is good. Looking at it from both sides. I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans and whatever you want to plug. But thanks a lot for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we could get this to work. And I guess I just tell people, if you're having an experience, just sort of step back and kind of think of all the plausible explanations that could be happening before you just jump to the conclusion that it's a ghost or a haunting. And then if you do feel you need to find a paranormal investigator or like a group, paranormal group to look into your haunting, if they charge you money, they're generally BS. Anyone who takes this seriously isn't out to make a profit. They want to actually help people. So that's a good kind of barometer to gauge if you are looking to bring in an investigator.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of